The distant cry of a circling hawk was the only sound that pierced the eerie silence as Abigail Lane stood with her hands bound, a noose hanging ominously before her in the dusty town square of Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1875. Her chestnut hair tumbled around her shoulders, no longer pinned in its usual neat arrangement, and her blue calico dress was smudged with the grime of 3 days in a cell hardly fit for an animal, let alone a woman of 22. "Abigail Lane," Sheriff Perkins announced, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "you stand accused of the murder of Walter Jenkins, theft of gold from the Silver Creek Bank, and conspiracy against this town. Have you anything to say before the sentence is carried out?" Abigail lifted her chin, eyes scanning the faces of people she'd once called neighbors. Some looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Others stared with barely concealed hatred or morbid curiosity. "I am innocent," she said, her voice unwavering despite the terror gripping her heart. "As God is my witness, I did not kill that man." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sheriff Perkins frowned, his weathered face betraying no sympathy. At 53, he'd seen enough hangings to be unmoved by the pleas of the condemned, especially those he believed guilty. "The evidence speaks differently, Miss Lane," he replied. "The murder weapon was found in your home, your fingerprints on the handle. Jenkins was last seen alive entering your boarding house. The stolen gold was discovered under your floorboards. I was framed." Abigail cried, desperation finally cracking her composure. "Someone planted those things. I would never." "Enough," the sheriff barked. "Dawn is breaking. It's time." The executioner moved forward, a man whose face was mercifully obscured by a hood. As he reached for the noose, a commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd. The thunder of hoofbeats grew louder, and the townsfolk parted as a horse and rider barreled through. "Stop!" the man's voice boomed across the square. The rider pulled his horse to a dramatic halt, sending dust billowing around him. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his tall frame commanding attention as he strode toward the gallows. The stranger wore a black duster covered in trail dust, a worn Stetson pulled low over his eyes, and a 6-shooter at his hip. His face was partially obscured by several days' worth of stubble, but his piercing green eyes were unmistakable. "This hanging cannot proceed," he announced, climbing the steps of the gallows 2 at a time. Sheriff Perkins placed a hand on his own pistol. "Who in tarnation are you to interrupt the course of justice?" The stranger removed his hat, revealing dark blonde hair streaked with gold from the sun. "My name is Daniel Vance," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent crowd. He looked directly at Abigail, whose eyes had widened in shock. "And this woman is my wife." Gasps and whispers erupted through the crowd. Abigail's mouth fell open, her bewilderment plain on her face. "Your wife?" Sheriff Perkins repeated skeptically. "Miss Lane never mentioned being married. We were wed in secret before I left for the Montana territories," Daniel replied without hesitation. "I've been working claims up north for 8 months. Just got word about what happened and rode day and night to get here." He turned to Abigail, his eyes conveying a silent message. "Play along." "Is this true, Miss Lane?" the sheriff demanded. Abigail swallowed hard, looking at the stranger who called himself Daniel Vance. In his eyes, she saw her only chance at survival. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger now. "This is my husband." "I'll need more than just your word," Sheriff Perkins said. "We have serious charges here." Daniel reached into his pocket and produced a folded document. "Our marriage certificate," he said, handing it to the sheriff. "And I can prove she couldn't have killed Jenkins or stolen that gold." The sheriff examined the paper, his frown deepening. It looked authentic, complete with a seal and signatures. "This still doesn't clear her of the charges." "The night Jenkins was killed, my wife was writing me a letter," Daniel said confidently. "I received it last week in Helena. The postmark will confirm it was sent the morning after Jenkins died." He pulled an envelope from his inner pocket. "And the gold, I sent it to her. It's our savings from my claim. I can bring witnesses from the mining company to confirm I made those earnings legitimately. Sheriff Perkins studied both documents, clearly confounded. The crowd watched in tense silence, the spectacle of an execution now transformed into something far more intriguing. I demand you release my wife into my custody while you verify my claims, Daniel said, his hand casually resting near his holster, not a threat, but a reminder. Unless you want to explain to a federal judge why you hanged an innocent woman married to a man with friends in the territorial government. For several long moments, no one moved. Then the sheriff sighed heavily. Cut her loose, he ordered the deputy. But neither of you leave town. If these documents don't check out, I'll have both of you in cells by nightfall. As the ropes binding Abigail's wrists were cut, Daniel stepped forward and wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders. She was trembling, either from relief or confusion, likely both. "Thank you, Sheriff," Daniel said with a tip of his hat. "We'll be staying at the hotel. Send word when you've confirmed what I've told you." He guided Abigail down the gallows steps and through the parting crowd. People stared openly, some whispering behind their hands. Daniel kept his pace steady and his grip firm around Abigail's shoulders until they reached his horse. "Can you ride?" he asked quietly. She nodded, still too stunned to speak. He helped her onto the saddle before mounting behind her. With a gentle nudge to the horse's flanks, they rode away from the gallows and toward the Silver Creek Hotel, leaving behind a bewildered town and the rope that had nearly ended Abigail's life. Only when they were inside the privacy of a hotel room did Abigail finally find her voice. "Who are you?" she demanded, backing away from him. "And why did you just lie to everyone in town?" Daniel removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair. Up close, Abigail could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 28 or 29. His face was handsome despite the trail dust and fatigue evident in the lines around his eyes. "My name really is Daniel Vance," he said, setting his hat on a nearby table. "And I just saved your life, Mrs. Vance." "Don't call me that," she snapped. "We're not married, those papers were forged." He smiled slightly. "Very good forgeries, cost me a pretty penny in Helena." "But why?" Abigail pressed. "Why would you risk everything for a stranger?" Daniel's expression grew serious. "Because I know you're innocent, Miss Lane, just as I know who really killed Walter Jenkins." Abigail sank onto the edge of the bed, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "You know, how could you possibly? Because I've been tracking the real killer for almost a year," he explained, unbuckling his gun belt and draping it over a chair. "Jenkins wasn't his first victim, and if we don't stop him, he won't be the last." "Who is he?" Abigail whispered. "His name is Randall Thorpe. He's a con man who poses as a gentleman investor. He gains people's trust, steals their money, and when someone gets too close to exposing him, they end up dead." Abigail's face paled. "Mr. Thorpe, the new investor at the bank, he arrived 3 months ago." Daniel nodded grimly. "That's him. He killed my brother in Denver last year. Made it look like a robbery gone wrong, but I knew better. I've been on his trail ever since, watching him work his way through Wyoming territory, leaving bodies and broken businesses in his wake." "But why frame me?" Abigail asked, trying to make sense of it all. "You saw something, didn't you?" Something that made him nervous. Abigail's eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. "I worked at the general store. 2 weeks ago, I was delivering an order to the bank after hours. I saw Mr. Thorpe in the vault with Mr. Jenkins. They were arguing about ledgers. Thorpe said something about discrepancies that needed to be fixed before the bank examiner arrived. And Jenkins realized Thorpe was embezzling from the bank," Daniel concluded. "So Thorpe killed him and needed a scapegoat. You were convenient. But how did you know to come here?" "How did you know about me?" Daniel moved to the window, peering through the curtains at the street below. "I've been tracking Thorpe's pattern. When I heard about Jenkins's murder and your arrest, it fit his method perfectly. I got here as fast as I could." Abigail studied him, still not entirely trusting. "That doesn't explain why you claimed to be my husband. You could have just brought evidence about Thorpe." Daniel turned to face her, his expression softening. Would Sheriff Perkins have delayed your hanging for a stranger's accusations against a respected businessman, or would he have dismissed me and proceeded with the execution? Abigail fell silent, knowing he was right. The sheriff would never have stopped the hanging for mere allegations. As your husband, I have legal rights. I can demand proper investigation. I can protect you. Daniel sat in the chair across from her. I'm sorry for the deception, but it was the only way to save your life. So what happens now? Abigail asked quietly. Now we prove your innocence by exposing Thorpe, but we need to be careful. He's dangerous and likely already knows something's wrong. As if on cue, a knock sounded at the door. Daniel instantly reached for his gun, motioning for Abigail to stay quiet. Who is it? He called. Message from the sheriff, Mr. Vance, came the reply. Daniel cautiously opened the door to find a young boy holding an envelope. Sheriff says to tell you he's looking into your claims and will have an answer by tomorrow, the boy said. Also says you're to keep Mrs. Vance in your sight at all times. Daniel tipped the boy a coin and closed the door, turning the envelope over in his hands. Well, we have until tomorrow, he said. Time to plan our next move. Abigail nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. In the span of an hour, she had gone from condemned prisoner to married woman, at least in the eyes of Silver Creek, and the man who had saved her was now her only hope of proving her innocence. Why would you risk so much for me? She asked softly. You don't even know me. Daniel's eyes met hers, filled with a determination that stirred something unexpected within her. Because I couldn't stand by and watch another innocent person die because of Thorpe, he said. And because the moment I saw your face on that gallows, I knew you weren't a killer. For the first time since her arrest, Abigail felt a flicker of hope. Whatever happened next, she was no longer facing it alone. That evening, they dined in the hotel restaurant, acutely aware of the stares and whispers from other patrons. To maintain their charade, Daniel held Abigail's chair and occasionally took her hand across the table, actions that sent unfamiliar but not unpleasant sensations through her. We need to talk to people who knew Jenkins well, Daniel said quietly as they ate. Find out when he started suspecting Thorpe. Margaret Wilson at the telegraph office was his sweetheart, Abigail replied, and Frank Dawson at the livery was his closest friend. Good, we'll start with them tomorrow. Daniel's thumb absently stroked the back of her hand, a gesture so natural it surprised them both when they realized what he was doing. As they returned to their room, the awkwardness of their situation became apparent. One bed, two strangers, and a charade that required intimacy they didn't share. I'll sleep on the floor, Daniel offered immediately. No, Abigail said, surprising herself. The sheriff might send someone to check on us. If they find you on the floor, they'll know something's not right. Daniel nodded, understanding her logic. I'll stay on top of the covers then. They prepared for bed in awkward silence, Daniel turning his back politely while Abigail changed into a nightgown the hotel had provided. When they finally lay side by side, a respectable distance between them, Abigail found herself unable to sleep. What if we can't prove it was Thorpe? She whispered into the darkness. Daniel turned his head to look at her, his profile visible in the moonlight streaming through the window. We will. I promise you that, Abigail. The way he said her name with such conviction made her believe him, despite all logic suggesting otherwise. Thank you, she said softly, for saving my life. He reached across the space between them and briefly squeezed her hand. Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be challenging. As she drifted off, Abigail realized that for the first time in days the knot of fear in her stomach had loosened. Whatever happened next, she was no longer alone. Morning brought a summons from Sheriff Perkins. Daniel and Abigail walked to the sheriff's office together, her arm looped through his as if they'd been married for years, instead of pretending for less than a day. Your marriage certificate appears legitimate, the sheriff grudgingly admitted when they were seated across from his desk. And the postmark on that letter does support your claim about the timing. Relief flooded through Abigail, but it was short-lived. However, Perkins continued, that doesn't explain the murder weapon in your home or the gold under your floorboards. So while I'm not hanging you today, Mrs. Vance, you're still not in the clear. Sheriff, Daniel interjected, have you considered that someone might have framed my wife? Perhaps the same person who actually killed Jenkins. Perkins narrowed his eyes. You have someone in mind, I take it. Randolph Thorpe, Daniel stated flatly. He's not who he claims to be. He's a con man and a murderer who's been working his way through the territories. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, skepticism written across his face. That's a serious accusation against a respected businessman, Vance. Thorpe has brought considerable investment to our town. And I'm sure your bank's ledgers are showing some discrepancies right about now, Daniel countered. Jenkins probably discovered Thorpe was embezzling funds. My wife inadvertently witnessed an argument between them about ledgers that needed fixing. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Perkins' face. I'll need more than speculation. Give us 3 days, Daniel proposed. Let us investigate. If we can't provide evidence against Thorpe by then, my wife will submit to whatever justice you see fit. The sheriff studied them both for a long moment. 2 days, he finally said, and Deputy Collins accompanies you everywhere. Daniel nodded, accepting the compromise. Fair enough. As they left the sheriff's office with Deputy Collins in tow, Daniel whispered to Abigail, we need to split up. I'll talk to Frank Dawson at the livery. You visit Margaret Wilson at the telegraph office. Women talk more freely with other women. The sheriff said we have to stay together, Abigail reminded him. Daniel glanced at Deputy Collins, who was already looking bored with his assignment. Deputy, my wife needs to visit the telegraph office for some personal matters. Would you mind escorting her while I check on our horse at the livery? Collins shrugged. Fine by me, so long as I can see one of you at all times. They parted with a brief touch of hands, Daniel's fingers lingering on Abigail's a moment longer than necessary. The gesture wasn't lost on her, and she found herself thinking about it as she walked to the telegraph office. Margaret Wilson was a petite woman with kind eyes currently rimmed with red from crying. When Abigail entered, Margaret's expression immediately hardened. I have nothing to say to you, she said coldly. Margaret, please, Abigail implored. I didn't kill Walter. I'm trying to find out who did. The sheriff found the evidence in your home, evidence that was planted there, Abigail insisted. Walter and I barely knew each other. Why would I kill him? What possible motive could I have? Margaret hesitated, doubt creeping into her expression. Did Walter mention anything unusual in the days before he died? Abigail pressed. Problems at the bank, perhaps. Concerns about Mr. Thorpe. At the mention of Thorpe's name, Margaret's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Why would you ask about Mr. Thorpe? Because I think he killed Walter to cover up his embezzlement. I saw them arguing about bank ledgers the week before Walter died. Margaret glanced nervously at Deputy Collins, who was standing by the door looking disinterested. She lowered her voice. Walter was worried. He found discrepancies in the account's large withdrawals that couldn't be explained. He was going to confront the bank owner the day after he. Her voice broke. Did he mention Thorpe specifically? Margaret nodded slowly. The night before he died, Walter came to see me. He said he had proof that Thorpe was stealing from the bank and its customers. He was going to expose him the next morning. Abigail's heart raced. This was exactly what they needed. Would you be willing to tell this to Sheriff Perkins? Margaret looked terrified. If Thorpe killed Walter, he wouldn't hesitate to kill me too. We'll protect you, Abigail promised, though she wasn't entirely sure how. Margaret, please, I'm facing the gallows for a crime I didn't commit. After a moment's hesitation, Margaret nodded. For Walter, I'll do it. But not until you have more proof. I won't risk my life on speculation. Abigail squeezed her hand gratefully. Thank you, we'll get that proof. Meanwhile, at the livery, Daniel was having a similar conversation with Frank Dawson. Jenkins was my friend, the burly liveryman said as he worked on shoeing a horse. If what you're saying about Thorpe is true, I want to help nail the bastard. Did Jenkins ever mention problems at the bank? Daniel asked. Frank nodded grimly. Night before he died, he came here in a state. Said he'd discovered something big, that Thorpe was running some kind of swindle. He'd found ledgers showing money being moved around, disappearing from accounts only to reappear elsewhere briefly before vanishing completely. Did he have proof? Said he'd made copies of some documents. Was going to take them to the bank owner in the morning. Frank paused, his expression darkening. Never got the chance. These documents, any idea where they might be now? Frank shook his head. The sheriff searched Walter's place after he was found. Nothing turned up. Daniel considered this. Where else might he have hidden something important? Somewhere Thorpe wouldn't think to look. A spark of realization lit Frank's eyes. There's a loose floorboard in the back room of the telegraph office. Walter and Margaret used it to pass messages when her boss was being difficult about their courtship, if he wanted to keep something safe for Margaret. That's it, Daniel said, excitement building. Can you create a distraction this evening? Something that would draw attention away from the telegraph office? Frank grinned, revealing a missing tooth. Leave it to me. 8 o'clock sharp, there'll be a commotion at the saloon big enough to draw every badge in town. When Daniel and Abigail reunited at the hotel, they excitedly shared what they'd learned. Deputy Collins had been called away briefly, giving them precious minutes of privacy. This is it, Daniel said. If we can find those documents, we can prove Thorpe's guilt and your innocence. Abigail's eyes shone with hope, but there was wariness too. What about Thorpe? Won't he be suspicious if he sees us asking questions? Undoubtedly, which is why we need to keep up our cover as reunited husband and wife. Daniel hesitated. In fact, I think we should make it more convincing. What do you mean? Thorpe needs to believe we're focused on each other, not on him. Tonight we'll have dinner at the restaurant where he takes his meals. We'll act like newlyweds, completely besotted with each other. Abigail felt heat rise to her cheeks. And then, when Frank creates his distraction, I'll slip away to the telegraph office while you maintain our cover. With any luck, by morning we'll have the evidence we need. Their plan set in motion, they prepared for dinner. Abigail borrowed a dress from the hotel proprietor's wife, a deep blue gown that complemented her eyes and hugged her figure more than her usual attire. When Daniel saw her, he momentarily lost his train of thought. You look. He began, then simply smiled. Beautiful. The compliment warmed her in unexpected ways. Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself. He offered his arm, and they made their way to the restaurant, where, as expected, Randolph Thorpe was dining with the bank owner and several other prominent citizens. Thorpe glanced up as they entered, his eyes narrowing briefly before his face assumed a pleasant mask. Ah, the mysterious husband, Thorpe said as Daniel and Abigail passed his table. Mr. Vance, isn't it? How fortunate you arrived when you did. Very fortunate indeed, Daniel replied cordially, though Abigail could feel the tension in his arm. I couldn't bear to lose my wife. Yes, quite a dramatic entrance you made, Thorpe commented, almost as if you'd planned it. Daniel smiled tightly. When a man loves a woman, Mr. Thorpe, he'll move heaven and earth to protect her. How admirable, Thorpe said, his smile not reaching his eyes. I hope you enjoy your stay in Silver Creek, brief though it may be. The threat in his words was thinly veiled. As they continued to their table, Abigail whispered, He knows. He suspects something. All the more reason to find those documents tonight, Daniel murmured back. Throughout dinner, they played their parts flawlessly. Daniel held Abigail's hand across the table, laughed at her comments, and occasionally leaned in to whisper in her ear ostensibly sweet nothings, but actually updates on their plan. To anyone watching, they appeared to be exactly what they claimed, a loving couple reunited after a long separation. Thorpe watched them surreptitiously throughout the meal, his suspicion evident despite his attempts to hide it. When he finally left the restaurant, Daniel squeezed Abigail's hand. He's not convinced, he said quietly. We need to be more convincing. Before she could ask what he meant, Daniel leaned across the table and kissed her gently on the lips. The unexpected contact sent a jolt through Abigail's body, a pleasant warmth spreading from her lips to her core. When he pulled back, his eyes held a question and something more. "Was that all right?" Abigail nodded, unable to form words immediately. The kiss had been brief but stirred feelings she hadn't anticipated. As they walked back to the hotel, Deputy Collins trailing a respectful distance behind, Daniel kept his arm around her waist. The physical contact, though part of their charade, felt increasingly natural. 8 o'clock, Daniel reminded her as they entered their room. "When you hear the commotion, go downstairs to investigate, keep Collins with you, I'll slip out the back." At precisely 8, shouting erupted from the direction of the saloon, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Deputy Collins immediately straightened from his position against the wall. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance, stay in your room," he ordered. "I need to see what's happening." "Oh, but I want to look too," Abigail said, affecting a curious tone. "It sounds exciting," Collins hesitated, clearly torn between his duty to watch them and his desire to join the action. "We'll all go," Daniel suggested. "That way you can keep an eye on us and see what's happening." The deputy agreed, and they headed downstairs. The street was filled with onlookers as a full-scale brawl spilled out of the saloon. Frank had outdone himself, at least 15 men were fighting, and Sheriff Perkins was shouting for order. "I need to help," Collins said, clearly itching to join the fray. "Go ahead," Daniel encouraged. "We'll stay right here on the hotel porch." The moment Collins joined the effort to restore order, Daniel squeezed Abigail's hand. "I'll be back as soon as I can. If anyone asks, I went to get a better view." He slipped away through the crowd while Abigail remained visible on the porch, playing the role of fascinated observer. Her heart pounded as minutes ticked by, each one increasing the risk of Daniel being discovered. At the telegraph office, Daniel found the back door unlocked as Frank had promised. The office was dark and empty, Margaret having gone home for the evening. Using a small lantern, he located the back room and began examining the floorboards. It took several minutes of careful testing before he found the loose board Frank had mentioned. Lifting it revealed a small space beneath, and there, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bundle of papers. Daniel quickly scanned them, his excitement growing. Jenkins had been thorough. There were copies of ledger entries showing systematic theft, notes detailing Thorpe's suspicious activities, and even a letter from a bank in Denver warning about a con man matching Thorpe's description. Daniel carefully replaced the floorboard and slipped the documents inside his coat. As he prepared to leave, a voice from the doorway froze him in place. "I suspected you weren't who you claimed to be," Randall Thorpe said, a revolver pointed at Daniel's chest. "What are you really doing in Silver Creek, Mr. Vance?" Daniel straightened slowly, keeping his hands visible. "I came for justice, for my brother in Denver and for Walter Jenkins here." Thorpe's smile was cold. "Ah, you're that Vance. I thought you looked familiar." "Your brother was equally troublesome before I dealt with him. Just as you dealt with Jenkins when he discovered your embezzlement. Jenkins was a fool who didn't understand the finer points of finance," Thorpe said dismissively. "As was your brother, just as you are now." "The difference is," Daniel replied calmly, "I have the evidence Jenkins collected. It's already been sent to the territorial marshal." Uncertainty flickered across Thorpe's face. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Why do you think I created that distraction at the saloon?" "My associate left town an hour ago with copies of everything." Thorpe's grip on the revolver tightened. "Then there's no reason to keep you alive." "Except that killing me would confirm your guilt," Daniel said. "The sheriff already suspects you. Kill me and you'll hang for certain." For a tense moment, Daniel thought Thorpe might shoot anyway. Then the sound of approaching footsteps outside made Thorpe glance toward the window. That momentary distraction was all Daniel needed. He lunged forward, knocking Thorpe's arm upward as the gun discharged into the ceiling. They grappled fiercely, crashing into furniture as each fought for control of the weapon. Thorpe was surprisingly strong for a man who presented himself as a genteel businessman, but Daniel had youth and righteous anger on his side. He managed to slam Thorpe's gun hand against the edge of a desk, causing him to drop the weapon. Shouting from outside indicated the gunshot had been heard. Within moments, the office door burst open and Sheriff Perkins rushed in, his own gun drawn. "What in blazes is going on here?" he demanded. Daniel, breathing heavily, pointed to the documents that had fallen from his coat during the struggle. "Evidence, Sheriff. Proof that Thorpe killed Jenkins and framed my wife." Perkins looked skeptically between the two men, then holstered his gun to pick up the papers. As he read, his expression changed from doubt to grim certainty. "Randall Thorpe," he said finally, "you're under arrest for the murder of Walter Jenkins and embezzlement from the Silver Creek Bank." As the sheriff handcuffed Thorpe, Daniel retrieved the fallen revolver and hurried back to find Abigail. The commotion at the saloon had largely subsided, and she was still on the hotel porch, her face tight with worry. When she saw him, relief washed over her features. "Did you find it?" He nodded, unable to suppress his triumphant smile. "It's over. Thorpe's been arrested." Abigail's eyes filled with tears. Without thinking, she threw her arms around Daniel's neck. He held her tightly, savoring the feeling of her pressed against him, her warmth and softness a stark contrast to the violence of moments before. "You're safe now," he murmured into her hair. "Your name will be cleared by morning." The next day, Sheriff Perkins formally dropped all charges against Abigail. News of Thorpe's arrest and the revelation of his crimes spread quickly through Silver Creek. Many townsfolk who had been quick to condemn Abigail now approached her with awkward apologies, which she accepted with more grace than Daniel thought they deserved. "What happens now?" she asked Daniel as they stood outside the sheriff's office, truly free for the first time in days. "That depends," he said, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been even when facing Thorpe's gun. "Our marriage may have started as a necessary deception, but these past few days with you—" He took her hands in his. "I've never met anyone like you, Abigail. Your courage, your intelligence, your kindness even to those who wronged you." Abigail's heart beat faster as she realized where this was leading. "I know it's sudden," Daniel continued, "and perhaps foolish to feel this way so quickly, but I find myself not wanting our charade to end." "Are you proposing we continue pretending?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "I'm proposing we stop pretending and make it real. Not immediately we could court properly, get to know each other without danger hanging over our heads." He smiled wryly. "I realize this is unconventional, meeting as we did." "Unconventional," Abigail laughed lightly. "You saved me from the gallows by claiming to be my husband. I'd say we're well beyond conventional. Is that a yes?" Instead of answering with words, Abigail rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. This kiss was different from their previous one, not for show, but a true expression of the feelings that had grown between them. When they parted, Daniel's eyes were bright with emotion. "I'll take that as a yes." "Yes," she confirmed. "Though I think we should keep the story of how we really met between ourselves. Our grandchildren might find it a bit shocking." Daniel laughed, wrapping his arm around her waist as they walked toward the hotel. "I don't know. It's quite a tale. Accused woman faced the rope at dawn. A cowboy rode in and said she's my wife. And then they lived happily ever after," Abigail suggested, leaning her head against his shoulder. "That part," Daniel said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "we get to write together." And write it they did. Over the years that followed, Daniel and Abigail Vance built a life that grew from their unusual beginning into something beautiful and enduring. They eventually settled on a small ranch outside Silver Creek, where Daniel's skills as a horseman and Abigail's head for business made them prosperous. A year after their actual wedding, a proper ceremony attended by the entire town, many of whom were still making amends for their hasty judgment, their first child was born. Margaret Wilson, now Margaret Dawson after marrying Frank, stood as godmother. As for Randall Thorpe, he faced justice not only for Jenkins's murder but for a string of crimes across the territories. The evidence Daniel and Abigail helped uncover led to his hanging in Cheyenne, bringing closure to many families, including Daniel's. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard, Abigail turned to her husband with a smile. "Do you ever think about how differently our lives might have gone if you hadn't ridden into town that day?" Daniel took her hand, running his thumb over the gold band he'd placed there. "I try not to. Some things are too painful to contemplate, even as possibilities." "I'm glad you found me," she said simply. "I'll always find you," he promised, "in this life and whatever comes after." As the sun set over the Wyoming hills, casting long shadows across their land, Daniel and Abigail Vance held hands and watched their children, living proof that sometimes the most enduring love stories begin in the most desperate circumstances, and that a lie told for the right reasons can become the truest thing of all.